This next session is going to be a panel moderated by Eric Marandet, Head of Product and Ecosystem here at Tulip, on the convergence of IT and OT. So go ahead and pass it to Eric.
So the theme of today's panel, we've got a lot of interesting folks up here that represent sort of a really interesting set of perspectives, particularly on this theme of the convergence of IT and OT. So I think to get us started here, we're gonna start off with some introductions. I've got a few questions that we're gonna get started with for the panel, but then I think we're gonna open it up to discussion, and then the idea is to open it up to questions from the audience as well. So we're gonna skip these intro slides, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and ask folks to introduce themselves as we go here. And here we go, perfect. Our final panelist has joined us. So, Anna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, what do you want included in that?
I think, so everybody here represents sort of a unique perspective on this theme here. So I think if you can share, where you sit within the broader ecosystem, how you're seeing this theme of IT and OT starting to come together, and then, tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, so my name is Anna Shidletsky. I'm CEO and founder of a company called Instrumental. My background is in mechanical engineering. I was at Apple for 6 years. I led product design for a handful of iPods and then the first generation Apple Watch. So I grew up as an engineer on the line, high volume production at one of the most admired brands in the world. Great place to grow up, but lots of problems. Lots of money gets spent on things like quality and a lot of waste. And so Instrumental started specifically with the idea of helping our customers find and fix issues on their manufacturing lines to eliminate half of the unnecessary waste in production process, of which there is 20 cents of every dollar. So that's a little bit about us. What we do is we are part of capturing data from the line. So in that way, OT, and then making that data useful to engineers who actually make decisions, make changes, own the drawings, are responsible for that process throughout the entire product lifecycle from NPI to production. And then that data is stored in an aggregated database that is traceable in a digital thread. And so that's the intersection to IT and making that data more available throughout an organization without having to go through a data science team. Many of our customers have some data, but they have to go to a data science team to get any information about what's happening from their data.
All right, thank you. And Alex, can you tell us a little bit about where you're coming from and your perspective on this theme?
Sure. I'm Alex from Germany. So I'm co-founder and CEO of the United Manufacturing Hub. By background, engineer, studied in Germany, in Aachen, and then got sidetracked to IT. So first starting a system house, integrating OT to IT in this direction. And over the years built and learned a lot and put it open source in 2021 because we think putting open standards out there will have integrate IT and OT even more. And what we do at UMH, we make integrating Tulip and other products into the actual infrastructure on the shop floor easier. So unified namespace is a name that's currently popping up, but at the end it's an event-driven architecture where all data in a factory at a single point, from where you can easily integrate into additional applications and services. Yeah, that's what we do.
All right, thanks, Alex. And Paul, I have no idea if you know where you are on this stage here, but you're right in the middle of the panelists, so we're going to go to you next. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Paul Baldassare, happy to be with you virtually today. I'm in Vienna in a European heat wave, so I'd probably prefer to be with you where it's raining a little bit. I'm working for a company, Flex. Many of you probably know us. We have about 170,000 people. We are in electronic manufacturing services. I started in IT 25 years ago in Flex, and I will always remember I was writing the first line of code for an in-house shop floor control system at the time, and since then our business has changed dramatically. And today we produce for about 1,000 big customers products in all kind of businesses: medical, automotive, industrial, enterprise computing, lifestyle, consumer. But more and more we not only produce a physical product, but we also produce a digital twin of that product. And what I mean with that is all the product history, right? When this product starts to be manufactured, from the lot codes, the test information, the repair information, sometimes information during the life cycle and so on, that goes with the product. And so we really sell a manufacturing service, but also a digital service to our customers. And that requires a complete change in mindset, as well as empowerment for our colleagues on the shop floor. Because at the end, with 1,000 customers and about 15,000 different part numbers, every product is a little bit different. You cannot do this through command and control. And we very much seek to empower our people in real time to make decisions, meaningful decisions on the shop floor, and record all of that and provide it to everybody else in the supply chain, up to the end user.
All right, thanks for that, Paul. And then we're going to head over to Dondi here.
So good afternoon. My name is Dondi Del Campo. I'm the advanced digital technology leader at Bain Company. My background is in enterprise IT, and for the last decade, I've extended that and went across the OT landscape, helping clients converge IT and OT. I started my IT experience with IBM, from software to architecture. And my OT experience began when I joined Apple as the enterprise architect that connected all the plants and extracted information to provide analytics within the organization. Since after that, I was with GE for a while under an architecture leadership program. And then for 6 years, I've been in management consulting. So the perspective we have on the IT OT convergence is the opportunities that the operational data creates when you combine it with IT tools and data sets. And so it creates a lot of impactful use cases for the client. So that's kind of where we try to look into in how we can leverage that. And of course, create an ecosystem that can scale and can support these use cases.
Thanks, Dondi. And then last, certainly not least, Jane, if you would introduce yourself and give folks a sense of where you're coming from.
Okay, so I'm Jane Arnold. I spent 35 years in manufacturing, most of that being in chemical. Starting as a controls engineer, I was a plant manager for a while, and then going into senior leadership over operations technology at a chemical company in Germany, actually. And so when the board asked me to implement Industry 4.0 to Covestro, I was like, sure, whatever that is. But the first thing I did was partner with IT. And how do we do this together? Because I've got the OT, he's got the IT, and how do we actually merge that so we're successful? I did spend a couple years at Stanley Black & Decker, and now I work in venture capital.
All right. And so as you guys see, we've got a leader of a business that sits right on the edge of IT and OT, who needs the buy-in from both sides. We have perspective here on what's the future of these architectures. How are we evolving towards more of an event-based architecture? What are the tools that you need to have in your stack? You've got practitioners, so Paul, implementing these solutions on the front line, for whom this is not a convenience. This is a must-have in a hyper-competitive industry, and if you don't get this right, there's real cost associated with that. And now you have both IT and OT represented from so I think an interesting and diverse set of perspectives here. I want to kind of start us off. I've had a lot of conversations with folks over the years, and people, Tulip gets brought into customers typically either through OT or through IT. And if I'm talking with OT, sometimes I hear things like, these guys need to get the heck out of our way. We know the problems we have to solve, and we just need IT to give us the tools and get out of our way, right? That's like the one perspective. On the other hand, you'll hear from IT, these guys have no idea what in the world they're actually asking for. They have no idea the complexity associated with this, the risk of getting it wrong. And I think Yuri set us up really well to have this conversation this morning when he said, the most esteemed Swiss value here is like the art of compromise. And, how do you work together? And I think what you're seeing is increasingly these two worlds coming together. And I'm just curious if I could get your perspective on, as you're seeing these come together, like, how are you reacting to this? How are you preparing your teams to be able to navigate this new space? And what are some of the systems and tools you're using to prepare for and to embrace this new reality? And maybe, Jane, we'll just start it off with you, if I could get your perspective.
So it's actually a pretty tough question. So when I was at Covestro, and we were going to start implementing new technologies, the OT team has the mission critical expertise, programming the equipment and controls and keeping everything working. But the IT team brought another layer of governance, including security and safety and just privacy and all the rules that go along with the data. And working together and actually saying, okay, we're going to work as a team, because in order to use cloud, we have to use IT. But it did take a lot of talk and compromise and discussion. Well, we can't do this, we can't do that. Well, yes, you can, here's how. And doing that. And it was the same way at Stanley, trying to convince the IT leadership, yes, we can do this. We can use cloud in the factory floor. We can use Tulip. And seeing the results and seeing how you can also do the governance and the security within the Tulip platform with the people, then it really made a difference.
Yeah, so I'll take it from a perspective of teams. So the story here is that I mentioned I was part of GE's leadership program when they first started back in 2013 to create GE Digital. And so in this leadership program, they put you in rotations. So they took me from Apple and said, oh, we like your culture. How do we now propagate it across GE? So what we had to do, we created what we call DevSpark. And the DevSpark was about going to engineering teams, industrial facilities, engineering teams, and try to understand how they build software. And in the process, try to let them understand the agile mindset, agile principles. Because back then, GE already knew that to really make use of digital tools, make use of the data, create insights, change your business, you have to change the mindsets of the people, even both consuming it and producing it. So that's kind of the perspective I have on these things.
I'll maybe contribute a less rosy picture. I'm all for collaboration, but I think in reality, a lot of the people that we speak to are on the OT side. They have problems to solve, and IT does get in their way. It's a step they have to go through, and if they need to go through the IT team, their perspective is going to take years. And so there are organizations that we've worked with where IT has been working on this thing for years, and the problem solvers still have the problem, and they want something that they can use and get ROI value out of right away. And I think something that's really interesting about working with customers like that, obviously you got to get through the security review, all of these pieces, because you should not just buy something and put your confidential data in it without talking to the IT team. But it's so interesting that the engineers with problems have so much of a gap of understanding of what is actually possible now, and that is not strange. When I started Instrumental 8 years ago, I was told by many people that manufacturers would never put their manufacturing data in the cloud. I think at this point, everybody's got something. Maybe aerospace and defense still maybe lagging there, but even the big OEMs in automotive, I was told Ford will never put its data in the cloud. The next year I talked to them, they're like, oh, we got it, our instance up, and it's working great. And so there's just this evolution that's happening where people are getting a lot more savvy. But many of these companies, the problem solvers, still don't know how to buy software, and they're used to buying chips and CapEx and things like that, but they don't know how to buy software. So there's certainly an intellectual gap between how to buy software, which IT is really good at, and what the problems we need to solve are and how fast we need to solve them, which is something that the OT side is really good at. And so yeah, when they can work together, it goes really well. But I think there's certainly an evolution in the market that's not all there. There's many organizations where the OT folks are just trying to get their problems solved still.
Sure. So I've certainly seen that as well. I'm curious, what's the rub? Why can't OT and IT, we're all good people, we're all trying to do the same things. Why can't we all just come together and figure this out? What are the real challenges that we're dealing with here that are causing this friction?
So in the background that I mentioned about the changing of the mindsets, I think the OT side are inherently engineers. My background is in engineering. Control systems engineers, you have to have your control loop tightly calculated. You have to be very precise. And not that the software, the IT world is not precise, but we're more used to failing, but being able to correct our failures, right? You don't have that luxury in OT. I mean, we used to. You have software companies now that are pushing that DevOps capabilities down to the shop floor. But I think it's the mindset of how we were academically formed.
And move fast, break things
I think
down.
also,
Let's go, Paul, please, let's go to you.
sorry, I think it's also about aligning on what should be the outcome, what's the goal, what's the mission and vision, right? In our case, many times we have the customer IT team and the customer OT team that provide their test solutions, sometimes their own systems that go up to like a mini shop floor control system as well. We have our solutions and we're dealing with a lot of different vendors from equipment. So we need to make sure that we align all the good intentions from the team. Everybody that normally works with us has great intentions, but when those intentions are not well aligned, then people start to get inefficient in the way that they support, right? So in the beginning, we have this conversation, where do we want to end up? What does end state look like, right? We need to have this digital solution, digital twin for our customer with the product. And then lay down how do we get there and who is doing what, and keep an intense collaboration throughout the whole process. In the past, we tried to solve this with systems and processes. It doesn't really work. We really have to think of the people side of the whole equation when we bring a lot of different teams together, and make sure that we include the end user, which is many times an operator with a limited skill set that we need to train over the time into the equation as well, that we come up with something that is sustainable and that provides the required output.
Yeah, I think I was listening to. There was a conversation taking place. It was a podcast I was listening to recently, and it was the perspective of IT being represented. And they said, "Look, everything that operations is asking for, they have, and they're going to bother me about something so silly as like a UI. You know, like it does everything they want it to do, and they wanted me to change the colors and move the buttons. Like, what a silly request. I mean, can somebody like? There are also there's, I think, the perspective of the software engineer, which is like, how is the data stored, and is it high availability, and is this going to be a reliable system that passes our security requirements? But then there's also the perspective of the front line, where like, I'm doing a job, the job is hard, and I need this software experience to conform to my reality. I'm wondering if you guys could speak a little bit to this theme, or how you've thought about bridging sort of the different priorities or ways that folks are thinking about these problem sets.
So with IT, and I can't speak for all of them, but the ones that I've experienced, they have like a ticket system. So everybody puts in a ticket, and it gets done based on, occasionally there's P1s, but it's all based on when it was put in. And it takes a long time. So at Stanley, we had developed some customized software before we changed to Tulip. And every time operations wanted something, it was a 6-month wait. And it's like, no, we cannot do that. You have to have people on the floor who can help you, who understand this is OT, this is mission critical. We need to be able to move that button because it means something, right? So, and it's a lot of work to get there. In OT, when we're doing development with citizen developers and on the shop floor, you have OT represented at most locations, if not all. And they can immediately go in and make a little tweak, and you're all good, you're done, you have that. And I've yet to see IT become that agile, where they allow that to happen. But we, at Stanley, we did modify our procedures to make sure that we were following the IT rules, but we still allowed that fluid flexibility and agility on that.
My tip for that would be to get a software developer for like one day on the line and actually operate the process themselves. I had to do this once because I had an argument. I was in IT, and with the OT folks, they brought me to the line and let me scan for a full day. And I realized what it actually means when the buttons are on the wrong side. And the whole day you shift around the mouse. It was not so much fun.
I love that. I love that.
I think it's also a good point around priorities, and that different organizations have different reporting chains that have different KPIs and OKRs associated with them. So inherently, there's going to be this tension between IT's priorities, which are around simplicity, reducing complexity, you know, aligning, and OT's priorities, which is get stuff shipped, like hit the number for the end of the month. It's very different and very tactical at times. And so, yeah, I think that's like the different timescales being a major reason why customers will essentially, on the OT side, will just buy stuff separate from IT. They have to bypass the 6-month wait. They can't wait 6 months. One of the other challenges of having an IT organization that's pushing towards simplicity is it makes it really difficult to work with the most cutting edge related technology. Because IT is worried about how it's going to scale, whereas the OT side just wants to even see if the technology is going to solve a major business problem for them. And a lot of organizations don't have like a great way to run pilots like that or proof of values like that. And so that's another friction point to have to figure out. But I would say for folks in the audience who are on one side or the other, like I do think there's lots of opportunities for OT to be able to make very strong business cases that can align to the organizational priorities of the IT side to show why this is like important to hitting our number and our stock price and our top line and our bottom line. But that's actually like a skill that OT folks don't often think about. How does like this actually affect the bottom or top line of the business? Whereas IT is thinking about that. They're often thinking about simplicity and trying to strip out complexity. So that would be like an actual tactical takeaway for folks on the IT side who want to be able to move faster, is to be framing the investments they want to make and the things they want to buy from the perspective of the overall organizational goals versus just, I need to solve this one problem on this one line.
Also, I think it's not only operations in IT, it's also operations IT versus IT. I think this is also what we saw a lot, like people who are responsible for shipping products and software on the shop floor, like people who are installing historians, databases, like actually IT commodity that is now for some strange reason an OT product that is standard, like not too harsh, but an OSIS of Pi is a super expensive database, and like also aligning those terms to IT standards, like in Postgres is IT commodity, like a database, and creating their same names and terminology, like unified namespace is like a great thing that happened. It's actually event-driven architecture, but now through the narrative of an OT engineer. And so you now can align names, etc., and take the same technologies to empower then the front line and get rid of like this year-old technology on the shop floor. Like it was always the case, like field bosses versus Ethernet-based protocols. Like in the 2000s, they got rid of it, or like a real-time operating system. But IT needs to move as well. Like for example, real-time capable is not yet possible in IT terms. So this was also IT needs to move a bit to OT. So heavy technical perspective, not that operations heavy, but this is what we see on a daily basis.
I'm curious, how do you guys think about, we're seeing, so the theme of this panel is the convergence of IT and OT. So I think increasingly what we're seeing is things that would traditionally fall in the domain of IT are operations, they're taking place within operations. And I think this is largely informed by, there are frankly just tools that, well, first of all, you have a workforce, that is comfortable interacting with web native tools, that is comfortable with no code, they're comfortable with logic-based composition and application development. So I mean, there's a level of familiarity and comfort that OT engineers have that I don't think was the case 10, 15 years ago, and the availability of the tools to support that. I'm curious though, like how would you guys, like how would you define, like what's the role of IT and what's the role of operations? I feel like IT is kind of getting a little bit of a bad rap on this panel, and that's certainly not my intention. They have a very hard job and a very important job. But like, how would you say, like how can IT support operations, and what does operations need to do to better support IT?
So I think IT has a lot to teach operations. I mean, just looking at the tools that we have here, I think a lot of these tools here come from the IT space, messaging, streaming technologies, right? So there is a lot of potential, and I just mentioned earlier, the agile culture, the mindsets. So there is a lot that IT has to teach operations, and I think that's happening. We're seeing it right now.
I'm curious, how do you guys think about, we're seeing, so the theme of this panel is the convergence of IT and OT. So I think increasingly what we're seeing is things that would traditionally fall in the domain of IT are operations, they're taking place within operations. And a lot of organizations don't have like a great way to run pilots like that or proof of values like that. I'm curious, how do you guys think about, we're seeing so the theme of this panel is the convergence of IT and OT. So I think increasingly what we're seeing is things that would traditionally fall in the domain of IT are operations, they're taking place within operations. And a lot of organizations don't have like a great way to run pilots like that or proof of values like that. I'm curious,
think also the process mindset and the IT mindset is quite helpful. Obviously, my company thinks that way. They made me the IT guy, the operations lead for the company. But if you don't have the understanding of what is needed from a digital threat perspective in operations, you cannot succeed anymore. Just doing some kind of hardware manipulation, either manufacturing or design, or so, really doesn't help you anymore, because the software content and the value add of software is getting so much in the centerpiece of every product and every service, right? And I believe the OT folks are getting more familiar with real-time information on their fingertips. They do expect a pretty simple user interface. 85% of the people in Flex now are millennials. The difference, that we see between people from former generations, I would say, and now millennials, is that millennials would not accept the bad user interface. And so our IT folks get under pressure, but at the same time, this is getting closer and closer where we want to be, that every engineer, every operator on the shop floor for the 160,000 people can get the information, not data, I mean information that they can process and make real-time decisions that actually lead to a better business outcome. And that's where the whole convergence is happening. So I believe that whole IT, OT convergence, we are in the beginning. It will be more and more integrated in the future.
I do think that as we mature in our software and applications, that IT is going to take a larger role. I have seen some companies where they're moving OT underneath IT and calling it manufacturing IT, and in order to foster that closer relationship and working together. And the examples that I know of, it's working fairly well. But you still have the freedom to make those on-the-moment changes that are necessary. And bringing in the whole citizen development, it does create more workflows that you need to make sure it's good, but it actually helps solve the problem.
In that sense, I think it's really impressive what Yuri was able to pull off, like at Richemont. Like, he didn't have like this shop floor IT or manufacturing IT, because there were not that many machines, systems, SCADA, whatever. So he could really aggressively push IT technologies to the shop floor. And then in the shortest 10 years, what is it? Like, have like all the messages, all Tulip integrated deeply into the infrastructure. So I think it's letting go a little bit on legacy stuff. It's not possible in every industry. Like, we work in pharma, so they cannot let go. But I think really let IT drive their products into the shop floor is something really, really great. And this is also where Tulip is building the proxy for doing that.
All right, we've got about a little over 15 minutes here. So if there's any burning questions, we'll take those now. If not, I'll keep asking questions until there are burning questions. But I want to pause for a moment. Does the audience have any questions for the panel? We've got 2 microphones right up here. Please just step up to one of the mics so we can get you for the recording.
So this is great because it's real time happening with technology like generative AI. And so on the IT side, CIOs are saying, hey, we need to be here, but it's coming from use cases that are all owned by operations. So how are you seeing that play out? And is there a world where they're just working together on the use cases? And then to your point, I think it was Jane, the governance, the privacy, the security, getting the CISO in there and all of that, how it gets rolled out. So do you see that as a enabler to bring the two together?
I think so, and I'm seeing more and more of the generative AI topic, and even though a few months ago I used to make fun of it, so we have to take that away. But what I'm seeing is that companies are in their private cloud and having it access their systems that are within a secure area or secure within the company four walls, and being able to actually like do a root cause analysis on a thing based on the historical information available. And it does work, and it's very interesting. And in most cases, IT seems to own the generative AI application, but it needs to be interfacing with all that time series data and shop floor data really to see what is happening. Because if you want to ask a natural language question, you need to understand all of it. Well, how come line 3 at this location doesn't produce as much as line 4? What's going on? And it should be able to, with access to all the data, come back and say, oh, well, this guy takes a smoke break every 15 minutes or whatever. I mean, something, give you some sort of context to what's happening, or a physical issue or whatever. But I think that is a tool that's going to bring IT and OT closer together. Yeah.
I think maybe from the perspective, we've been shipping AI products for about 7 years, so we were there very early. Little less specifically on Gen AI because it sounds like you've seen stuff that makes you excited about it. I'm still on this camp of like, I don't know that this is the place. But AI in general, absolutely the place. It's just like the type of technology. And one of the things that we've really seen is that our customers like don't necessarily, they'd like all that complexity to be like in a little box that they have a great interface to and have a good, product essentially to productize that AI versus like having the really powerful AI. And what we've seen is that IT gets involved from the perspective of like making sure it's secure and safe. And we've started to see in our MSAs with customers, they want like an AI clause or whatnot. But like the reason you buy Instrumental is because you want our AI. And so if you want to not let us use AI, you shouldn't buy Instrumental. And so the IT teams haven't quite caught up to how do we make sure it's safe and secure and how do we control it and all of those pieces. But the OT teams, operations on the ground that have problems to solve, there's all sorts of really great niche applications. And my particular biased perspective is I believe that all of those applications are going to come from niche companies that solve for like one vertical application versus the broad like Gen AI for all, like just put any kind of data in here and it'll just work like magic. Eventually, maybe we'll get there. Maybe we're already there. I haven't seen it. And so essentially where our customers are, come to us is when they're like, well, I have this particular need and I need that to work really well.
Well, you have to understand garbage in, garbage out. But it'll be IT's fault, so we'll blame IT.
I see. Well, there's a lot of garbage in that data. And there's a lot of I think the first step to any kind of digital transformation is getting a good data set that's not garbage. And a lot of the data sets, prior to Tulip, not Tulip customers, but a lot of the data sets that are out there have very limited data that you can actually use to do engineering or operational work on. It just has less resolution than you need to understand root cause, failure analysis, et cetera. And that's been our perspective for a long time. And I think it's part of Tulip's perspective as well, is like you want more than just what you're going to get out of a basic MES.
Yeah, it's all predicated upon, first of all, you need the data, because there's nothing to train if you don't have the data. Second of all, you need the data contextualized. And where does that data come from? It comes from the operation, right? Yeah. So, you need to understand where is this data coming from, in what context am I ingesting this, is it appropriately documented, and can I navigate this, and then can I train something on it? And then if you can, AI becomes pretty interesting.
Yeah.
If you haven't solved that first set of problems, don't expect too much,
Like GPT. It'll be like GPT. Garbage in, garbage out.
Other questions from the audience?
Maybe not a direct question, but trying to defend a little bit IT because there seems to be a lot of frustration here about IT.
Yes.
And maybe you can comment on that. Maybe manufacturing companies don't have the right IT people because companies like Google, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, they are able to handle mission critical services. It's normal, it's standard out there. Maybe can you comment on that?
I'm biased. This is my co-founder, so.
So I have to say, the first 25 years of my career, I was responsible for the DMZ down to the field equipment, right? And so I didn't really have to do anything with IT ever until we said, oh, we want to start putting things in the cloud. It's like, oh, we have to start following new rules. I mean, we followed lots of rules, don't get me wrong, but it was completely different. And it's just about understanding what those rules are, and then they understanding what the OT rules are as far as mission critical. And I think any problem can be solved. I mean, I actually had really good success partnering with IT on OT integration, and I like to pick, but it's more for fun. So.
Yeah, I
I
think
have to say, coming from an IT background, IT normally only gets recognized when something goes wrong, right? So that's a little bit part of the profession that you get a little bit of a bad image. But at the end, I think people really understand now that without a world-class IT team, you cannot progress. And I have to say, for our IT team, I feel pretty strong that they are really good in what they are doing, and also really want to serve their internal customers and our external customers. So I would argue that this between OT and IT conversation and sometimes blaming is when people don't have aligned goals, or when they only see each other when something is not working. And it's part of management like myself to make sure that the teams also celebrate the victories and the successes together, that they see the value in each other and work well together to, at the end, come to the goal that we all want to achieve. Is it serving our customer? Is it an ROIC goal or whatever else it is? If we just come together when we have problems, obviously that's not helping for the conversation between the teams.
Yeah, I think there are two things that I think IT is in helping OT with. I think so one is architectures, right? Reference architectures. In serving multiple clients, I think it's important to be able to consistently provide and de-risk architectures that can work. And I think these are the mindsets that the IT world have had for a while now. I mean, we've had reference architectures in all sorts of things, and especially now when there are so many players involved in the different layers, you really need to have a framing of how to approach the same problem in a very structured way. I think the other one that IT can really help in this convergence is the governance piece. As you mentioned, the security, network security. I mean, network security, we've had DMZs in IT for a long time, protecting our databases, protecting our, exposing our web services. In the same manner, we have to push that down to the plants, and we have to be able to make sure that we have the segments really properly laid out. We layer the Purdue model levels. So, and not just the implementation of the way it's set up, but the continued management of them. Generative AI, when it comes in, I mean, right now, one of the things that I'm looking into is the governance model of data, the governance model of security, the governance models of software. They were isolated, but now when you have something like generative AI come to the table and a company wants to have their data scientists let go at it, you really have to look at all these three areas to govern their activities, how they deploy the models, what data sets the models have access to, kind of where you deploy the model, because you can deploy the model in a level 3 environment, you can deploy models up in the cloud, and it's, those are two different areas. So I think IT really, in governance and architecture, can really help.
So, one of the most important takeaways from these things that I validated was IT/OT convergence is as much about bringing people together as much as connecting different systems, and data governance is a big part of that. And there's a lot of talk about data ops, data governance from different types of vendors in the space. But my question is, I just wanted to see what are a couple of successful best practices, things that you've seen or that you would recommend to the organizational side of who should manage what data, what's a good level of when do you duplicate it, when do you not want to duplicate it? That's my question to the panel.
Try never to duplicate it. Try to keep the single source of truth on unified namespace, message broker, and as closer to the source. I think before it's good data, it should be in the governance of OT. So like the process engineer who understand what integer 0x543 means and can give it a current unit and a good value. It should be under their control, and as soon it's like available for other services, it should be then in the IT side to make it available and also highly available, no 99.99%. And I think as soon as it's good data, it should be in the governance of IT.
The little point on the data, I think a lot of organizations fail to do this, is to have a good tiering strategy. So the data that your controls engineers need has a different granularity than the data on your plant managers need, and it has a different data than the supervisor have access to clouds, nor that the analytics needs in the cloud to make use of operational data. So a good tiering strategy, one of the first things we did when I was helping GE Power with moving their facilities to the cloud was that tiering strategy, because you cannot push everything up, right? So aside from the creating that context, that unified namespace, it's having a good tiering strategy.
Okay, we've got a couple.
I would add to what.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry about that.
I would add to what Alex and Leonidas said. Don't duplicate and aggregate in a way that everybody is looking somehow at the same data, but obviously management cannot look at the very details of every single product. But make sure that there's one version of the truth that people look at, because that reduces organizational friction tremendously, and make sure as well that the engineer who owns the data, that is closest to the source, pays attention to the data and make sure that data is correct and is taken care of when there is actions coming out of the information that need to be driven.
So if I were to summarize some of the themes that I'm hearing here, and as we get ready to wrap up in the next few minutes, so first and foremost, what is IT and ops coming together? What are the things that we can do? First is we need the IT for the architecture. We need IT to own where the business systems. There are a couple of principles here. The first is we don't want to replicate data across different environments. We need to have a single source of truth. That single source of truth needs to be available, preferably in an event-based architecture. The data needs to be contextualized closest to the source when it's captured. That's happening typically in an operational environment, referencing our AI conversation here. If you don't have the data, if it's not contextualized and it's not available, good luck with AI, you're going to have a problem. And then the other theme that I'm hearing sort of between the lines is there's almost a need or an expectation for IT to help create the environment where operations can operate and solve problems. And so, if you wanted to connect some sort of shop floor application to your ERP, you don't want your frontline engineer to do that without IT, right? I think we all agree there. But there needs to be an environment, there needs to be guardrails, there needs to be governance within which operations can work and operate freely to solve their problems and do it quickly, right? These are some of the themes that I'm taking away from this panel. I'm wondering, is there anything you guys, as we have just a couple of minutes here and we get ready to wrap, are there anything that I left out that you would add to this as a takeaway?
Yeah, I'd just like to emphasize the team element, and that everyone has to work together and be open and as a team, and all the other points were good takeaways, but I just can't emphasize that enough, to work together on problems.
I think I want to emphasize the point I made when I began, was the opportunity that this creates, right? Yeah. I mean, so IT has always been created a lot of productivity with data generated by people, generated by systems, and now you have data coming from your actual operations. It enriches a lot of use cases. It enriches the use cases of your factory floor. It enriches the use cases of your corporate systems. So I think, and look at that, look at the opportunity, but not look at, and then be a little broader. Don't look at your HRM and see what you can do with that. Don't look at your MES and see what you can do. Go across. You have your data sets are going to be aggregated on the cloud. You can relate your MES data to your supply chain data, to your distribution data. There's so many use cases that will come about.
Yeah, great point, right? We've been focusing a lot on where are the friction points, but what's really on the other side of that is incredible and unprecedented opportunity with a set of tools that didn't exist before.
Correct.
And a future that wasn't possible a few years ago. Yeah, that's a great point.
I was just going to re-emphasize, if you're not getting what you need from your IT team, that building a business case that ties to organizational priorities for translating the tech speak and jargon at the edge where the ops folks are into business line priorities is a way to potentially get some of that attention, to get senior level leadership to get aligned, to start working more like a team together, if that's happening to you as someone on the operations side.
And Alex, Paul, I'm wondering if you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap?
So it's really about being intentional and upfront about the value that you want to create, which normally is enabling people, empowering people to take decisions that drive improvements from a business perspective, from a technology perspective, and rally your team around it and make sure that you support your team. And I think most of those frictions actually disappear.
Perhaps from my side, I think talk more, like operations and IT, to align terminology, technology, and requirements. So at UMH, we created a community, and this is where an open place where everybody can discuss ideas. So I think that should happen more. Happens in IT, but not yet in OT. And IT and OT, this could be a great opportunity to really converge if you're like in the same space discussing problems.
Well said. Well, I just want to thank our panelists today for participating in this conversation. And for the audience, thanks for joining and thanks for your questions as well. I hope this was a valuable discussion. Thank you.